High school students ask me all the time, should I submit my SAT or ACT scores to test optional schools? Well, I'm going to address that question and I'm going to give you information about that so you can make the right decision in this video. So I get asked this question a lot. Should I submit my SAT scores to test optional colleges? Should I just not submit them? And so I want to address this question in the simplest way possible. And the direct answer is, it depends. So I would do it selectively. I wouldn't just say, well, I'm not going to submit my scores to any of the schools. But I also wouldn't say, I'm just going to submit it to all of the schools. I would use this selectively. Okay? The schools that I would submit scores to are the schools in which your scores are above the average. If your SAT scores or ACT scores are below average, then I wouldn't submit it to that school. Now you might ask, well, how do I know what the average SAT score is? I mean, it's literally as simple as Googling it, okay? You're applying to UVA or whatever school. So you put in, what is the average SAT score for UVA, okay? What is the average SAT score for University of Michigan, whatever it is? And you'll see it, and it's fairly accurate. And if you're way above that, or, if you're significantly, but if you're 50 points, 100 points, whatever above that, then I would submit your SAT scores. It'll be another factor that helps you stand out. But if you're 50 points, 100 points, or even more below the average, then maybe you consider not submitting them, okay? Let me give you a real life example. So recently, I had a student, her GPA was good, and her extracurriculars were excellent. She was very active in her community, and she was on the student board of this and the student council of that. And she just was one of those kids, very active, very personable, great communication skills. But her SAT scores were terrible, okay? She just had absolutely no desire or passion for it. She just, and her scores were like 1,100 or something like that. But I told her she's one of the smartest kids that I've met, because intelligence is not always reflected on standardized test scores. I just, and I'm in this business, but I'll tell you right now, I met some incredibly bright students who just can't get high scores on the SAT, or who just refuse to do it, is more accurately put. But regardless, she is a very smart kid, and she had good grades, and so anyway, she applies to colleges, and recently I got a text from her. She got accepted to University of Maryland Honors College. She got accepted to Boston University. She got waitlisted at WashU, Washington University in St. Louis, and Emory University in Georgia. All really great schools. Boston University, very difficult to get into. Emory, very hard to get into. And WashU, not an easy school to get into. And University of Maryland, even, not a walk in the park, and especially the honors college is not that easy to get into. But she got into the two and waitlisted at the others. Now, let me tell you why this is so surprising to people, because if you looked at her SAT score, she had no business even applying to those schools. If SAT was absolutely required in all those schools, I think she would have gotten rejected from all the schools. But you guys are very, very lucky right now, because a lot of schools are still test optional. And so you can use it selectively. And for her, I told her for those schools, I wouldn't submit SAT scores. In fact, for her, I told her, don't submit your SAT scores to any of those schools, okay? Which she didn't, to her credit, okay? Which was great. So she got accepted to two very good schools and waitlisted at two very, very good schools. But again, she would not even have gotten accepted, I think, if those schools required SAT scores. So that's what I'm talking about. If your SAT scores are very low and you just didn't do well, don't despair. Just don't submit them, okay? And don't apply to colleges that require SAT scores. But if you did very well on the SAT, that is just another factor that will help you gain a little bit of an edge. I think of it more like an extracurricular. So the SAT, people say, well, I don't. There are a lot of schools that I'm going to apply to are test optional, or all of them are test optional. So I'm just not going to take the SAT, which is fine. You don't have to do that. But if you take the SAT and you get a very good score, that is just another thing that you can add to your application that makes you look good for colleges. So I always say if you're somewhat motivated, or if you're motivated, very motivated to do well in the SAT, and you can do well, then I would take it because that's going to give you an edge. And still, some colleges use them in determining scholarship eligibility, for example. So MIT is a college recently that reinstated the SAT requirement. So I think as COVID, I don't want to say passes, but as time as the time gap grows from when COVID began, I think you'll see more and more schools require the SAT. But I do think that a lot of the schools that are test optional may remain test optional, and that's good for students for you. So, but that would be my take on whether you should submit your SAT scores or not. Let me just say one last thing about this, because I had a student make this mistake. When you submit your SAT scores to colleges, okay, for some reason, some students think that when you guys fill out Common App or Coalition App or the application, somehow magically the SAT scores get automatically sent. They do not. You have to go into College Board, go into your College Board account, and you got to send the scores, okay, to those colleges. You have to find the college, the school codes, and you have to have them sent. And most schools that will require SAT scores will require all of your scores. They want to see all of it. Okay, so when you're sending scores, if you're going to send the scores to colleges, you probably need to send all of them. But when you fill out your common application, or other applications, but Common App is the most common one, so I'll just talk about that. When you fill that out, you're self-reporting your SAT scores, your best reading and writing score, the month and year you took that, your best math score, and the month and year you took that. Okay, you're self-reporting that, but you still have to send in your official scores from College Board. Otherwise, they don't know if you're telling the truth or not. So obviously, that's sort of a common sense reason. But so make sure that if you're going to send the scores, go to College Board, log in, and have your scores sent. Now, when should you do that? I would say at least 2 weeks before the application deadline. But I tell my students, do it a month before. Okay, if your application deadline is November 1st, which is a common deadline for early action, early decision. Okay, November 1st. Beginning of October, I would just have the score sent. Okay, if you're taking the October test and you want to have the October, like this October, you're going to be a senior and you're going to take that test and submit those scores, then you can still do that, but make sure that when you're registering, that you just tell them, I want to have the score sent as soon as they come out. Go ahead and send it to this school, this school, this school, because by that time you should know exactly what schools you're going to apply to. Okay, so anyway, I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.